Presently, there are approximately 11 to 12 million undocumented people in the U.S. Statistics reflect many stories: the absence of available visas, labor market demand, past and present trade policies, and growing economic disparities between nations. Of the 11 to 12 million population of undocumented people in the U.S., 1.8 million are children. Undocumented children are particularly vulnerable. They are growing up with a negative stigma and without same opportunities as other children.
I think it was mostly that I had the fortune to maybe be born here, but for all those people that are searching for the chance to get better at something or to achieve something, I think that if they work hard to get there, I think they should have the chance to, have the same opportunities as maybe I do.
In 2002, approximately 1.3 million undocumented children who have lived in the U.S. for 5 or more years were enrolled in kindergarten through 12th grade schools. The D.R.E.A.M Act, the Development and Relief for the Education of Alien Minors Act, is the bipartisan legislation that addresses the tragedy of young people who grew up in the U.S. and have graduated from our high schools, but whose future is circumscribed by our current immigration laws.
I would say that it's not the majority of cases that we have, but we definitely do have a few cases where it's these exceptional students that have graduated, they've been here since they were about 2 or 3 years old, graduated from high school, like at the top of their class. We had one case where the kid was actually, he was already in college. He was from New Mexico, and he owned a home, he had his own business, he was very successful, and he was only like 21, I think. But his mom didn't have lawful residency. The only one that did was his sister, but she couldn't petition for him. So there was no relief for him, and he couldn't even ask for, usually if you're here for 10 years in the U.S. you can ask for some kind of cancellation of removal, but he couldn't even ask for that. So basically all there was left was voluntary departure, which means that he would have to go back to Mexico, and he didn't know English, he didn't know Spanish, he didn't know anybody in Mexico, so it was a very, very sad situation for him.
The Nonpartisan Migration Policy Institute estimated this summer that about 2.1 million people would qualify for the D.R.E.A.M Act, but that only 825,000 would actually gain citizenship at the end of the 6-year period. The D.R.E.A.M Act has died during every congressional session since it was first introduced in 2001. The latest version of the D.R.E.A.M Act was introduced to Congress on May 11, 2011. Under the D.R.E.A.M Act, undocumented individuals could become conditional legal residents with the conditions of them: 1. Entering the country before 15 years of age. 2. They must have been in the country for at least 5 consecutive years. And 3. They must be of good moral character. The students would be given the residence for a period of 6 years in which they must either 1. Acquire a degree or have completed at least 2 years on track for that degree in good standing, or 2. Have served in the armed forces for at least 2 years. Conditional legal residents would not be eligible for Pell Grants or certain other federal financial aid grants. They would, however, be eligible for federal work study and student loans, and states would not be restricted from providing their own financial aid to these students. If enacted, the D.R.E.A.M Act would dramatically increase students' average future earnings and consequently the amount of taxes they would pay, while significantly reducing criminal justice and social service costs to taxpayers. Efforts to overhaul the nation's web of immigration policy stalled in recent years, in part because Republican lawmakers demanded a focus on border security and enforcement before entertaining any relaxation of current immigration policies. The D.R.E.A.M Act impact on society. The D.R.E.A.M Act will increase global competitiveness by utilizing skilled U.S. trained professionals. H-1Bs are visas with a limited yearly quota of 65,000 that are provided to highly skilled foreign nationals. These visas get allocated in less than 1 day every year. Many U.S. companies recruit professionals from around the globe because of the lack of workers in domestic fields. Due to the lack of available visas, companies say they are experiencing innovation losses as skilled workers flock to the booming economies of China and India. The D.R.E.A.M Act will improve national security by alleviating the recruitment shortages to the armed forces. In April 2005, the Army Reserve and the National Guard failed to meet their recruitment quota. Only 51% of inactive Ready Reserve troops reported for duty. Every year, 7,200 of the 180,000 new recruits are non-citizens. Immigrants account for 20% of recipients of the Congressional Medal of Honor.
I met a group of soldiers in California. They weren't citizens of this country, and yet they did more to be considered American by actually going to fight in Iraq, a war that they didn't agree with, and I don't either, but I give them more props than anybody else. Here are people who weren't born in this country, who were born in El Salvador, who are not citizens of this country, who are willing to risk their lives, and they don't even have the decency of this country to be called citizens. They don't have the right to vote and elect their president, whom they shed blood for, a country whom they watched their brothers die for.
So we're going to keep fighting for the D.R.E.A.M Act. We're going to keep up the fight for reform. And that's where you come in. I'm going to do my part to lead a constructive and civil debate on these issues. And we've already had a series of meetings about this at the White House in recent weeks. We've got leaders here and around the country helping to move the debate forward. But this change ultimately has to be driven by you, the American people.
In strides to pass the D.R.E.A.M Act, we urge you to act. The following are amongst 10 things you can do of the endless opportunities. This century of globalization will see America either descend into timid isolation or affirm its openness. Throughout history, great nations have declined because they built up walls of insularity, but America has been the exception for over a century. It would be a tragedy if America were to turn toward a false sense of security just when China is ascending with openness, Western Europe is declining into isolation, and the real solution is so obvious from our own American heritage.
Tell me what you know about dreams. Tell me what you know about night terrors. Nothing. You don't really care about the trials of tomorrow. Rather lay awake in the bed full of sorrow.